The office lights flickered off as Marcus leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't discuss this with your son." Still, I paused, the weight of the betrayal settling in my chest, my own flesh and blood plotting behind my back. As the door clicked shut, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trust between us had already been shattered. While my fingers hovered over the phone, I realized that no matter the love, some lines are too far crossed. The same silence that filled the room now felt like the end of an unspoken pact between mother and son. That's when I called the notary and with a steady hand locked the POA down. "All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." Barbara sat across from Marcus in her penthouse office, the skyline of New York stretching out before her like a shimmering sea of opportunity. But today, none of it felt like a win. The conversation they were having was urgent, too urgent, and the envelope Marcus slid across the table only added to the tension thickening the air between them. "Barbara?" Marcus started, his voice steady but carrying an edge of something unspoken. "You need to act quickly. The situation is changing and you're running out of time." She frowned, the weight of his words sinking in. She trusted Marcus. She always had, but today he seemed different. His usual calm demeanor was underscored by an anxiety she hadn't seen before. "What's happening, Marcus? You're scaring me." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if to guard against prying ears. "It's Elliot. I don't think you fully understand what he's capable of. Your son has ambitions that go beyond just business. I'm afraid he's already making moves that could compromise your financial independence." Barbara's chest tightened. Her son, Elliot, the person she had always hoped would one day inherit not just her wealth, but her wisdom, her legacy. But recently his focus had been solely on his startup, on himself, and she had started to feel the distance grow. Was that what Marcus was sensing? Was her son already planning something she couldn't see? "I don't want to keep secrets from him," Barbara said, more to herself than to Marcus. Her voice wavered, unsure whether she was trying to convince him or herself. Marcus gave her a sharp look, as though sensing her hesitation. "You've always been upfront with him, I know. But now's not the time for that, not with everything on the line. You need to take control of your future, Barbara, before he does." His words stung, but they struck a chord of truth she couldn't ignore. Her son's ambition had always been his defining trait, but lately she'd begun to wonder if he was moving further away from her, not just emotionally, but financially. Was he already positioning himself to take more than she had ever been willing to give? Was he thinking about taking control of everything she had worked so hard for? Marcus pushed the envelope toward her. "This is the document that will protect you," he said quietly. "Lock in the POA. Take control of your assets before it's too late." Barbara stared at the envelope, her hands trembling as she reached for it. The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. She thought of Elliot, his coldness, his drive. The thought of shutting him out, of taking steps that would change everything between them, filled her with dread. But what choice did she have? Her future was slipping through her fingers, and if Marcus was right, it was no longer just about protecting her wealth. It was about protecting herself from the son she had given everything to. She looked up at Marcus, a resolve settling in her chest. "I'll do it, I'll sign." Marcus nodded, though there was a shadow in his eyes. He knew as well as she did. Once she made this decision, there would be no going back. Barbara set her phone down, the conversation with Jessica still weighing heavily on her mind. She had made the call, laid the foundation for securing her future, but now the reality of what that decision meant hit her with full force. The power of attorney, POA, wasn't just a legal document. It was a declaration, a barrier between her and her son. She leaned back in her chair, the plush leather creaking beneath her as she stared out at the city. The night had fallen, casting a quiet glow over the skyline. New York felt so far away, distant, as if the world was carrying on without her. In a sense, it was. But for her, everything had changed in the span of a single conversation with Marcus. Her mind drifted back to the warning he had given her, the one that now seemed to echo louder with each passing minute. Your son has ambitions that go beyond just business. It was a statement that dug into her like a splinter she couldn't remove. Had she been blind to Elliot's true intentions all these years? The thought unsettled her. With a sigh, she picked up her phone again, dialing Jessica's number. She needed the reassurance. She needed to hear the confidence in Jessica's voice, the kind of certainty she had always given her in their years of working together. "Jessica," Barbara said when the lawyer picked up, "I'm doing it. I'm going to move forward with the POA." There was a pause, and Barbara could almost feel the weight of Jessica's thoughts through the silence. "Are you sure about this?" Jessica asked, her voice calm but laced with concern. "I have to be," Barbara replied. "I can't let Elliot take control of everything I've worked for." "I'll prepare the documents," Jessica said. "But Barbara, you need to be aware. This could change everything between you two." Barbara nodded, even though Jessica couldn't see her. "I know." The conversation ended, but Barbara didn't feel any relief. She hadn't realized how much she had relied on the idea that her family would always be there for her, that her son would be the one to carry on her legacy. Now she was preparing to sever that thread, to lock away her future from him, perhaps forever. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time, it was a text from Elliot. "We need to talk. Something's up with the family trust. When can we meet?" The words on the screen seemed to pulse with urgency. Was this coincidence, or had he already figured out something was wrong? A cold knot formed in Barbara's stomach. She had been expecting this, the moment when Elliot would demand answers, but it still hit her with unexpected force. She hadn't planned for this confrontation, hadn't considered how to explain the choices she had made. The decision was made, though. She would protect herself, no matter the cost. But facing Elliot now felt like a battle she wasn't sure she was ready for. The lines had been drawn. She would meet with Jessica tomorrow, sign the documents, and prepare herself for the fallout. But would Elliot ever forgive her for what she was about to do? Barbara entered David Richards' office with slow, measured steps, as if every movement was weighted by the gravity of her decision. The room was quiet, filled with the soft hum of the city outside, but inside it felt as though time had paused. The sleek wooden desk before her was a reminder of the finality ahead. She had come here to make her choice real. David, as always, was calm, his composed demeanor offering a quiet reassurance. He was the expert. He had seen this scenario many times, but she couldn't shake the feeling that today was different. Her son, Elliot, was what made it different. "Barbara," David began, sliding a thick stack of documents toward her. "Everything is in order. This POA will give you full control over your finances. No one can contest it once it's signed." She nodded absently, her eyes scanning the top sheet, the bold letters spelling out power of attorney. It was just a formality to David, but to Barbara it felt like a line in the sand. David paused, watching her closely. "Are you sure about this?" His voice was calm, but there was an underlying caution. He knew how much this decision weighed on her. Her gaze flickered to the documents, then back to David. She had known what needed to be done since the moment Marcus had warned her. Elliot's ambitions could ruin everything you've built. The thought had gnawed at her, keeping her awake at night, questioning her son's motives. Had she been blind to the distance growing between them? Was he just focused on his startup, or was he positioning himself to take what was hers? Barbara's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. She had done everything for Elliot, but now it was about her. She wasn't just protecting money. She was protecting her independence, her life. "I have to do this." she said, the words firm despite the fear curling in her stomach. She looked down at the paper, her hand shaking as she signed her name. The ink dried quickly, a final stroke of control in a life that had slowly slipped away from her grasp. David didn't rush her. He allowed the silence to settle as she absorbed the weight of her decision. This wasn't just a legal formality, it was a commitment that would forever alter the future of her relationship with Elliot. Once the paperwork was done, David slid the documents into a folder and pushed it across the table toward her. "It's complete," he said. "All set." Barbara's eyes lingered on the signed papers. She had protected herself, but at what cost? She'd put a wall between herself and her son, one that might be impossible to dismantle. She stood up, the cold weight of the decision settling over her like a thick fog. As she made her way out of the office, her phone buzzed again, a message from Elliot. "We need to talk." Barbara's heart skipped a beat. Was it already too late? The next day, Barbara's phone buzzed as she sipped her coffee, the quiet hum of the city outside her window doing nothing to soothe her nerves. It was Elliot. She hesitated before answering, the weight of what she had just done still heavy on her chest. "Mom," Elliot's voice came through the phone, sharp with concern. "I've been going over the family trust and noticed some changes. What's going on? Why all the adjustments?" Her breath caught in her throat. The family trust. Her mind flashed back to the signature she had just put on the POA, the irreversible decision that had just altered everything between them. She had expected this, but it still hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Everything is fine, Elliot," she said quickly, trying to sound casual even though her heart was racing. "Just some routine updates, nothing to worry about." She could almost feel him frown on the other end. "I don't buy it," he replied, his voice tightening. "I've been noticing this for a while. You've been making these moves behind the scenes, and I deserve to know what's going on. I'm your son. I have a right to be involved." Barbara's mind raced. He didn't understand. Couldn't understand. Not yet. He was too focused on his own ambitions, his startup, to see what was really at stake. She was protecting herself, but it was becoming clearer by the second. She was also protecting him from himself. "I told you, Elliot. Everything is fine," Barbara repeated, though the words felt hollow coming out of her mouth. "There's no need to worry about it." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long, filled with unspoken tension. She could hear him shift in his chair, and then, in a quieter tone, he said, "I'm not stupid, Mom. I know something's off. You've been shutting me out." Barbara's throat tightened. He didn't know the half of it. What could she say? That she had just signed away control of everything to keep him from taking it all. That she was doing this to protect herself, to preserve whatever dignity she had left? "You don't understand, Elliot," she said softly, her voice cracking despite her efforts to stay calm. "I'm just making sure everything is in order. It's nothing to be concerned about." Elliot's response was quick and frustrated. "I am concerned. You've been making decisions without telling me. I'm part of this family too, but you're treating me like I'm an outsider." Barbara's chest tightened, the words stinging more than she expected. She had always made him a priority, always believed that one day he would understand why she did what she did. But now it felt like that bridge was crumbling beneath them. "I've always put you first, Elliot," she said, the words laced with an edge she hadn't intended. "But I can't do that anymore. Things have changed." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. When Elliot finally spoke, his voice was colder than before. "I don't know what's going on with you, Mom, but I don't like it." And then the line went dead. Barbara sat there, the phone still pressed to her ear, the weight of the conversation settling over her like a blanket of cold steel. She had made her choice, but at what cost? The days following her conversation with Elliot were tense, each one heavier than the last. Barbara tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, burying herself in work, but the weight of her decision lingered. Elliot's calls had become more frequent, his questions more pointed. It wasn't just concern anymore, it was control. And with every conversation, Barbara could feel him pushing harder, trying to slip into the spaces she had carefully guarded. It started small, innocent questions about the family trust, the investments she had made, the assets she was managing. At first, Barbara had brushed it off, chalking it up to a son trying to be involved. But soon, the questions became more insistent. Elliot's voice, usually filled with an easy confidence, now had a sharp edge. "Mom, I've been going over the portfolio," he said during one call, his tone barely masked with faux concern. "You're taking too many risks. You need to pull out of some of these ventures before it's too late. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about." Barbara's stomach tightened. It was the same pattern she had seen before. Elliot trying to insert himself into her business decisions, even though he had no real experience. He was too focused on his startup, on his own ambitions, to understand the gravity of her choices. "Elliot, I'm fine," she replied, her voice tight. "I've been managing my investments for years. I don't need you to worry about it." But Elliot wasn't convinced. "You're not getting any younger, Mom. You need to start thinking about the long term. I'm just trying to help." The audacity of it struck her like a slap. This wasn't help. This was an attempt to take control, to maneuver his way into a position where he could dictate how she spent her money, how she managed her assets. And then, things escalated. At a family dinner a week later, Elliot made his move. His voice was louder now, more authoritative, as he spoke about the family business and the future. "It's time we talk about how things are going to work after you're gone," he said, his gaze sweeping across the table, daring anyone to disagree. "I think it's time I take over some of the management. We can't keep doing things the old way forever." Barbara's heart sank. She had always known that Elliot's ambition was fierce, but now it was clear. He was not just vying for control. He was planning to take it from her. The thought of him running everything she had built made her sick to her stomach. But what could she do? She had already signed the POA, locking in her control. But even with the legal documents in place, she could feel the shift. Elliot's behavior became more demanding, more controlling. He no longer respected the boundaries she had set. The family dynamic was changing, and Barbara knew it was because of the choice she had made. It was the only way to protect herself, but the cost was steep. Elliot's frustration grew as Barbara remained firm. He didn't understand, couldn't see what she was doing to protect them both. And as the weeks passed, Barbara realized that the distance between them was no longer just emotional. It was now a chasm, one that no legal document could bridge. The real battle was only just beginning. The argument with Elliot erupted with a force Barbara hadn't expected. She had known it was coming, but when the words finally spilled out, they felt like a slap. Elliot arrived at her penthouse that afternoon, his face tight with frustration. Without a greeting, he stepped into the living room, crossing the space between them in a few long strides. "I know about the POA," he said, his voice sharp. Barbara felt the familiar knot in her stomach tighten. She had hoped to avoid this confrontation, but the time had come. "Elliot," she said quietly, "I did what I had to do." "Had to do?" Elliot's voice rose. "You've shut me out. I'm your son, and you've excluded me from all of it. From the family trust, from the future. Why? What's going on?" Her heart pounded, but Barbara refused to show any sign of weakness. "I did it for my security," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not going to let anyone take what I've worked for." He scoffed, stepping closer. "You think I'm trying to take something from you? I'm your family. I've worked alongside you for years, and now you're treating me like a stranger. I deserve to be part of the decisions." Barbara's chest tightened. "Elliot, trust isn't automatic. It's earned." She paused, her breath steadying. "I didn't do this because I don't love you. I did it because I need to protect myself. I've watched you push for control, time and time again. You've always wanted more. And now I need to make sure I can't be manipulated." His expression faltered for a moment, hurt flashing in his eyes, but the anger quickly returned. Manipulated. Mom, I've never asked you for control. I've always been there for you. But this feels like a betrayal. Barbara's stomach churned. She could feel the weight of his words. She loved Elliot, always had, but the person standing before her now was different. He was a stranger in many ways. I'm not betraying you. I'm protecting myself. You've been distant. You're so focused on your startup, your own future. How could I trust you with mine when you don't even understand what I've built? Elliot's face twisted with frustration. I do understand. I've been your partner, your son. I know how this works, but you've kept me out. You've made it clear I'm not good enough to be involved. Barbara's heart cracked, but she stood firm. Trust is earned, Elliot. You've never asked for my trust. You've taken it for granted. But now I'm setting boundaries, and that's something you don't get to control. Elliot took a deep breath, shaking his head, his voice cold. I won't forget this, Mom. You've made your decision, but I promise you, I'll make sure it's harder for you in the future. With a final glare, he turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving Barbara standing in the middle of the room. She felt the air go cold around her. The fight had left her conflicted. She knew what she'd done was for the best, but the distance between them was now impossible to ignore. The door slammed behind him, and Barbara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Barbara sat at her desk, the weight of the past few days pressing down on her chest. After Elliot's angry departure, the silence had been deafening. But now, an email from Jessica jolted her back into reality. Elliot has hired a lawyer. He's challenging the POA. Her heart sank. She had expected it, but seeing the words in black and white made it real. He wasn't just angry, he was taking action. Elliot had never been one to back down, especially when it came to the family wealth. This was just the beginning. She called Jessica immediately. What's his argument? Barbara asked, her voice tight. He's claiming you're unfit to make decisions alone, Jessica replied, the calmness of her voice contrasting the storm raging inside Barbara. He's trying to paint you as an out-of-touch matriarch who's keeping him from his rightful inheritance. Barbara felt her pulse quicken. The betrayal cut deeper than she had expected. She had trusted him, loved him, but now it seemed like his ambition had eclipsed everything. I won't let him get away with this, Barbara said, her tone firm. What are we doing next? We'll counter with your history, Barbara. You've been independent for years. You've built everything on your own terms. We'll show the court that this POA was necessary because of Elliot's behavior. Barbara absorbed the words, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. The legal battle wasn't just about protecting her wealth, it was about everything she had worked for, everything she had built with her own hands. The relationship with Elliot, the family she thought she could trust, was crumbling before her eyes. As the days passed, the media began to get wind of the legal battle. Widow's power of attorney challenge. Son fights for control of family fortune. Barbara's name was splashed across every tabloid. The press painted her as a woman desperately clinging to power, a mother who'd betrayed her son in the pursuit of wealth. It was hard to escape the stories, the whispers that followed her every move. But despite the public scrutiny, Barbara didn't flinch. She'd come this far. She had the law and Jessica on her side. Jessica reassured her constantly. Elliot's claims won't stand, Barbara. We have everything we need to defend you. He's lashing out because he feels entitled, but he has no case. But despite Jessica's calm words, Barbara felt the pressure mounting. The media, the legal battles, and the ongoing estrangement from her son. It was all too much to bear at times. Yet she remained resolute. The POA was not just a legal document, it was her shield. She had no other choice but to protect herself. Just as the phone call ended, Barbara stared at the legal papers before her, her signature still fresh on them. She had made this choice, but the cost was far higher than she had anticipated. The battle was just beginning, and deep down, she knew it would take more than the law to protect what was left of her family. The judge's gavel struck the desk, cutting through the silence of the courtroom like a knife. Barbara's breath caught in her throat as the words she had been waiting for filled the air. The court rules in favor of Barbara Harrington. The power of attorney stands. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The tension she had carried for weeks, for months, began to loosen, but it was replaced with an overwhelming sense of both relief and emptiness. She had won. The POA, the one thing she had fought so hard to secure, was hers to keep. Elliot sat across from her, stunned. His face had drained of color, his jaw clenched tightly. Barbara didn't look at him for long. The look of defeat was too hard to bear. Her own heart ached, but the satisfaction of knowing the law was on her side calmed the storm inside her. The judge continued, his voice firm. No further legal challenges will be entertained. The POA arrangement is final, and Elliot Harrington will be responsible for his own legal fees. Barbara let out a slow breath. Her legal victory was now complete. The documents she had signed, the choice she had made, had been validated in the eyes of the law. Yet, as the reality of the ruling sank in, she couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss. Elliot's gaze dropped to the floor, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Barbara saw his frustration, his humiliation, but she also saw something else, something darker. This had been his battle, one he believed he was entitled to win. She had pushed him away, set boundaries that had cost them both. The court proceedings wrapped up quickly. There was nothing more to say. Barbara stood, feeling the weight of the victory pressing down on her. Her body was tense, her mind a whirl of emotions. She had protected herself, but at what cost? Jessica walked over to her, offering a reassuring smile. "It's over, Barbara. You did the right thing. You're in the clear now." Barbara nodded but felt no triumph. She had done what needed to be done to safeguard her future, but the damage to her relationship with Elliot was irreparable. The bond they had, shared, once strong, was now a distant memory. She couldn't help but wonder if it had been worth it. As they left the courtroom, Barbara looked down at the papers in her hands, the signed POA, the court order, and the reality hit her once again. She had won. But in winning, she had lost her son. The ache in her chest was real and sharp. The battle for her financial legacy had been won, but at the cost of something far more precious. The future was uncertain, and as Barbara stepped out into the world beyond the courthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of this fight was still to come. Barbara stood in front of the large windows of her penthouse, watching the city pulse below her, the streets full of life, full of movement. It was ironic, she thought, that she felt more alive than ever, despite the legal battle she had just endured. The judge's ruling had given her the security she needed, but it was also a reminder that the cost of protecting herself had been far higher than she had imagined. Months passed, and with the legal issues behind her, Barbara began to focus on something she had always put off: building a legacy. The POA was no longer just about wealth. It was about what she wanted her life to stand for. She wasn't just a survivor, she was someone who could make a difference. And that difference would be about empowering others. Barbara threw herself into the idea of starting a nonprofit for women's financial independence, something that had been a personal passion of hers for years, but had always taken a back seat to business. Empower. Her became her focus, a platform to provide women with the resources and knowledge to take control of their financial futures. It wasn't just about charity, it was about teaching women how to build their own security, just as she had done. It was a slow start, securing funding, finding partners, but Barbara was no stranger to persistence. She built a network, started speaking at conferences, and soon enough, the nonprofit began to grow. Her story, the one that had been twisted and scrutinized during the POA battle, became a testament to resilience. She was no longer just the woman who had fought her son in court. She was becoming a leader, a champion for change. The media that had once painted her as a cold, controlling matriarch now recognized her as a philanthropist, a powerful advocate for women's financial freedom. Barbara found herself being invited to panels, asked to share her journey. Her name, once tied only to wealth, was now associated with something far more meaningful. Her investments began to align with her new values. She supported sustainable businesses, focusing on ventures that made a positive impact. Her wealth grew, yes, but now it was built on something that felt more fulfilling. She was creating a future not just for herself, but for generations to come. Elliot, though, became a distant memory. His calls stopped. His attempts at re-engagement fizzled out. Barbara didn't chase after him anymore. The man who had once been her world was now someone she couldn't recognize, someone she no longer had the energy to fight for. Her relationship with him was irreparably broken, but it was something she had learned to live with. Her friends and colleagues admired her strength. They saw the new Barbara, the one who had rebuilt not only her fortune, but also her life. She felt a new sense of peace, a confidence that came from knowing she had taken control of her destiny. But just as she was beginning to embrace this new chapter, an unexpected text arrived on her phone. "We need to talk. It's about your son." The words hit her harder than she expected. Had Elliot come back into her life, or was this something worse? Barbara's heart tightened as she stared at the message, unsure of how to move forward. Barbara sat on the terrace of the villa, the evening sky painted in hues of orange and pink, a serene calm settling around her. The weeks had passed in a blur, filled with meetings, travel, and the quiet hum of Empower, her continuing to grow. But now, here, at this moment, everything felt still. She had made it. The weight of the legal battle had lifted. The tension of the POA fight, the anxiety of the fallout with Elliot, all seemed so distant. It had taken time, but now, in the quiet of the Mediterranean evening, Barbara could finally breathe. She was no longer tied to the past, no longer burdened by the need to constantly defend her choices. Her life now centered on purpose, security, and independence, values that had once been distant dreams but were now her reality. Her work with Empower, had blossomed beyond her expectations. It wasn't just a charity, it was a movement. Women were coming to her for advice, support, and empowerment, and Barbara's heart swelled with pride every time one of them shared how her nonprofit had changed their life. She wasn't just building wealth for herself anymore. She was helping to build it for others, one woman at a time. The media attention that had once painted her as a cold, calculating matriarch now highlighted her philanthropic work. Barbara was being invited to speak at conferences, panel discussions, and interviews. She had become a respected voice in the business and nonprofit communities, a woman who had rebuilt her life after great loss and had turned that strength into something far more meaningful than just money. Her investments had shifted as well. No longer was she solely focused on growing her wealth for the sake of wealth. Now she invested in sustainable businesses, those that aligned with her newfound purpose and values. Her financial portfolio was now as much about impact as it was about profit. Elliot, on the other hand, had faded from her life. His attempts at re-engagement had stopped. There were no calls, no messages, no signs of him trying to reconnect. And in some ways, Barbara felt a pang of sadness. He was still her son, and the loss of that relationship would never truly leave her. But the person she had known and loved was gone. In his place was a stranger, someone driven by ambition in ways that Barbara couldn't understand or support. Her friends and colleagues saw the change in her, too. They admired her for her resilience, for the way she had rebuilt her life. Barbara felt more connected to them than ever. They had supported her, never questioning her decisions, never doubting her strength. With them, there was no judgment, just the kind of unconditional respect that had eluded her in her own family. As the sun dipped lower, Barbara took a deep breath. She had fought for everything she had, and now, as she looked at the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky, she realized that despite the battles, she was finally at peace with herself. The future was hers to shape, and she would build it on her own terms. Barbara sat quietly at her desk, reviewing the financial reports for Empower Her, her nonprofit that had grown exponentially over the past year. But it wasn't just the growth that filled her with pride. It was the stories of women whose lives had been transformed. The letters, emails, and messages of gratitude were a reminder that her legacy was already being built. She had made a choice years ago, a choice that had changed the course of her life, and now her work was finally creating the ripple effect she had dreamed of. Her son Elliot was still a distant memory. She hadn't heard from him in months, not since their final confrontation. That relationship, once filled with hope, had withered away like a flower left without water. She had made peace with it, even if the ache of his absence remained. Her focus was now on something more meaningful, the future. She was no longer defined by the past or the battles fought to protect her assets. She was building a future she could be proud of, one rooted in empowerment and change. One evening, as Barbara sat on her balcony, reflecting on the journey she had been on, a message arrived on her phone. It was from James, her longtime friend and business partner who had supported her through all the highs and lows. His words brought a smile to her face. "I've been thinking about the next step, Barbara. James and I are ready to take on the family business in a new direction. It's time to start using it for the causes we believe in, the things that matter. Let's make this legacy truly last." Barbara read his message twice, the weight of it settling over her. James, who had always stood by her, was now offering something beyond financial stability. They were going to use the family business for something greater, a way to continue the work she had started with Empower Her. James had become not just a business partner, but a true friend, someone who shared her values and vision. His involvement signaled a new chapter, one where Barbara could finally release the ties to her past and move forward into the future with the support of those who truly understood her. In the months that followed, James became more actively involved, taking the lead on strategic partnerships and expanding their reach. The bond between them deepened, rooted not only in business but also in shared purpose. They were creating something new, a legacy that wasn't defined by wealth but by its impact. It was a testament to the respect and trust they had built together, both in business and in life. Meanwhile, Madeline's reputation continued to deteriorate. The media, once eager to capture her rise, had now turned on her. Her manipulation of the family business was being exposed, and her attempts to control Barbara's assets had backfired. While Barbara had risen to become a respected voice in both business and philanthropy, Madeline's shadow had become something she could no longer escape. As Barbara's influence grew, so did her platform. She was invited to speak at major conferences, hailed as a trailblazer for women's financial independence. Her message, one of strength, resilience, and reinvention, resonated deeply with women from all walks of life. She wasn't just another wealthy philanthropist. She was a woman who had faced unimaginable challenges and had come out stronger on the other side. Her journey was one of transformation, and now she was sharing it with the world. Through her public speaking, Barbara's voice reached even more women who were looking for guidance, for empowerment, and for a way to rebuild after experiencing emotional and financial betrayal. Inspired by these stories, Barbara started a foundation dedicated to supporting women reclaiming their independence after similar experiences. It became a natural extension of her work with Empower Her, a place where women could not only find financial freedom, but also healing. The foundation provided counseling, resources, and mentorship to help women navigate the challenges of rebuilding their lives. It was during one of her foundation's events that Barbara realized just how far she had come. Surrounded by women who had once felt powerless, but who were now standing tall, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The years of struggle, the heartache, the uncertainty. All of it had led her to this moment. She was creating a legacy that was bigger than any one person, any one story. It was a movement, a powerful force for change. And then, as she left the event, a letter arrived at her office, a letter from Elliot. It had no return address, no phone number, just a single phrase written in his familiar scrawl. "I want to try again." Barbara's heart stuttered in her chest. Had he truly changed? Could she let him back into her life? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as she stared at the letter in her hands, knowing that no matter what, the next step would be the hardest of all. The morning after the letter from Elliot arrived, Barbara stood at the window staring out over the city that had become both her battleground and sanctuary. Her mind buzzed with questions she didn't want to confront. The letter, with its simple words, "I want to try again," lingered in her thoughts. Could she let him back in? After everything, she didn't know. The years of pain, the betrayal, the fight for her independence. It all came rushing back, threatening to pull her back into a world she had fought so hard to escape. But Barbara didn't have time to dwell. The world she was building wasn't about to wait for her to untangle the past. She had empower, her to expand, a foundation to grow, and the legacy she was creating could not be derailed. She folded the letter and tucked it in her desk drawer, her decision made, at least for the moment. The future was hers to create. Days turned into weeks, and Barbara's rise continued. Her influence in business and philanthropy grew exponentially, her reputation solidifying as a woman who had not only survived the battles of her life, but had thrived. She spoke at international conferences, sharing her story of reinvention, resilience, and empowerment. Her nonprofit expanded, reaching women across the globe, offering them the tools and support they needed to break free from financial dependency and build their own futures. With every new connection, Barbara felt the weight of her choices shift. Her past was no longer a burden. She was building something that mattered, not just for her, but for others. Empower her was a movement, a revolution in how women saw themselves in the financial world, and Barbara was at the helm, guiding them toward independence. As her success in business grew, so did her network of influential contacts. People admired her strength, her drive, and the authenticity she brought to everything she did. Barbara had become a respected figure, not just in business circles, but in her community as well. She connected with other powerful women, business leaders, and philanthropists who recognized her as more than just a wealthy woman. They saw her as a force for change. With James by her side, Barbara had become an unstoppable team. Meanwhile, Madeline's final attempt to reclaim her finances fell apart. She had tried to maneuver her way back into the family business, scheming behind the scenes, but Barbara had been one step ahead. With legal action now in place, Madeline's assets were frozen, and her attempts to recover anything from the family estate were blocked. It was a poetic justice, the culmination of all the manipulation and deceit that had marked their fractured relationship. Barbara felt a strange satisfaction in knowing that Madeline's reach had been curtailed, but there was no joy in it. The victory was hollow, a reminder of how far she had come, but also of the destruction caused by years of power struggles. Madeline's downfall wasn't her victory. It was just the end of a chapter she had long since closed. As her business ventures continued to flourish, Barbara's confidence grew. She was building a legacy that wasn't just about wealth. It was about impact, about creating opportunities for women to thrive, to reclaim their power. But it wasn't just about what she could accomplish alone. James had become a true partner in every sense. He had supported her through the toughest times, and now, together, they were reshaping the future of their family business. Their work was inseparable. Their shared vision more than just a partnership. It was a bond that transcended business and became something deeply personal. But as Barbara prepared for the next phase of her journey, something she hadn't expected crept back into her life, a call from Elliot. The message was simple, cryptic even. "We need to talk. Please." Her heart lurched, a tangle of emotions flooding her chest. Could she really ignore him forever? Could she truly close the door completely? The question hung in the air as Barbara sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had built everything she wanted, except for one thing. Could she ever reconcile her past with the future she was creating? And just like that, the past was knocking at her door again, threatening to pull her back into a story she thought was over. The days following Elliot's cryptic message felt like an endless waiting game, each moment stretched with the weight of decisions Barbara had yet to make. The letter had brought a tidal wave of emotions she wasn't prepared for: anger, sorrow, longing. But now, she had too much to focus on to allow herself to be pulled into that past. She had created something powerful with Empower Her, a future that was her own, and she was determined to stay on that path. But there was one thing she had yet to do, a final step to secure her legacy. Barbara knew that her financial independence, her new life, had to be protected beyond the walls of her empire. She couldn't let herself be vulnerable to any lingering ties that could destabilize what she had built. The decision was made. She picked up the phone and dialed her lawyer, Jessica. "I need to revise my will," Barbara said, her voice resolute. "One last time. Everything needs to be in order." Over the next few days, Barbara worked with Jessica to finalize the changes. She ensured that her assets were secured, that her work would continue long after she was gone. She named a few key people to carry on her mission with Empower Her, people she trusted, people who shared her vision for women's financial independence. Her foundation, her life's work, would live on no matter what happened. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the message. Her will was more than just a legal document. It was her final testament to the world she wanted to create. A world where women stood strong, where they controlled their futures, where they found their voices, and she would be the one to ensure it happened, even from the other side. After her will was signed, Barbara moved on to other preparations. Maggie, her trusted ally in the fight for women's rights, had been working behind the scenes, preparing a public statement about the importance of standing up to family abuse. It was time for Maggie's voice to be heard. The world needed to know that they weren't just fighting for themselves, but for every woman who had ever been silenced by family ties, by manipulation, or by fear. Maggie's statement was powerful, eloquent, and needed. Then Barbara received a call that made her pause. Emily's legal team had dropped the case. The ongoing battle that had once threatened to undo everything was over. Emily's name had been cleared, and she was no longer a part of the manipulative game Madeline had tried to play. That victory, however small it might seem, was monumental in Barbara's eyes. She could finally look forward without that dark cloud lingering over her. As the world began to shift back into place, Barbara received an unexpected offer, one that made her heart skip a beat. A publisher had reached out to her, asking her to write a second book based on her journey. Her first had been a success, but now they wanted her story of rebuilding, of empowerment, of the years spent navigating family betrayal and rising above it all. She felt a rush of excitement. This was another opportunity to share her story, to reach even more women, and to keep pushing the movement forward. But there was still more to come. Barbara knew that she needed a fresh start. She had spent years in a sprawling mansion, a symbol of everything she had built, but it no longer suited her. She needed something simpler, something that would reflect the peace she had finally found within herself. She sold the mansion, moved into a smaller, more intimate space, a home that felt like hers in every sense of the word. It was the next step in her journey, one that would allow her to live with clarity, without the burdens of the past. With the foundation of her future secure, Barbara finally allowed herself a moment of calm. She was free from the weight of Elliot's manipulation, free from the ghosts of Madeline's deceit, free to create a future that was hers to shape. She was at peace, But just as Barbara prepared for this new chapter, the text from Elliot still loomed over her. Despite everything she had accomplished, despite all the strength she had shown, a small part of her still wondered, what would happen if she answered him? Would it undo everything she had worked for? Or was this the one moment where she could find peace, even with the person who had hurt her the most? The door to the past, left slightly ajar, would never truly close. And the question hung in the air, waiting for her to decide. Barbara stood before the mirror in her new home, the soft morning light filtering through the windows, casting gentle shadows on the walls. She had moved into this smaller, more intimate space just weeks ago. The transition wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. A space that no longer carried the weight of her past. The mansion she had lived in for years now felt like a chapter that had long closed. This new home, nestled in a quieter part of the city, reflected the woman she had become. Calm, grounded, free from the tumultuous life she had left behind. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Another invitation to speak, this time at a local women's empowerment event. Barbara had made it a point to focus on smaller, more intimate gatherings where she could connect with women on a personal level. It wasn't about fame or recognition anymore. It was about impact, about being present in the lives of those who needed her most. She had become a sought-after speaker, a voice of strength for women who had been silenced, marginalized, or manipulated by toxic relationships, much like the one she had endured with Elliot and Madeline. As she walked into the small event space, Barbara felt a sense of peace wash over her. It was a local gathering, intimate yet powerful. A few dozen women sat before her, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity, pain, and hope. Barbara had seen that look before, the look of someone on the edge, struggling to find a way out. She began her speech, sharing her journey of self-empowerment, her struggle to break free from a family that had tried to hold her captive, emotionally and financially. As she spoke, she saw the transformation in their eyes. She wasn't just telling them her story. She was giving them permission to tell theirs. She was giving them the strength to step out from under the shadows of their own toxic relationships, to reclaim their power, and to build their futures. "I know it feels impossible," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes full of emotion. "I know the weight of family can feel suffocating, but I promise you there is life beyond the control. There is freedom, and you have the power to take it." Her words were met with nods, some women wiping away tears, others just sitting in quiet reflection. Barbara knew, as she always did, that her words weren't just about her, they were about all of them. They were about the women who had found themselves trapped in the same way she had, who were now seeing the light of possibility at the end of the tunnel. After the event, several women approached her, some with stories of their own betrayal, others simply with gratitude. Barbara listened, offering advice and support, just as she had always done. But this time, it was different. She wasn't just listening as a survivor, she was listening as someone who had built something real, something that could make a difference in their lives. Later, as she sat with a group of women who had attended the event, Barbara realized that the network she had always dreamed of was finally coming together. She began to formalize plans for a support group, a space for women to come together and share their stories, to rebuild their lives with the help of those who understood their struggles. The idea was simple, yet profound. A sisterhood of women who could help each other find the strength they thought they had lost. The group would meet regularly, offering resources, mentorship, and a community that would remind them that they weren't alone. As the group continued to grow, so did the reach of Empower Her. What had started as a small nonprofit was now a flourishing movement, touching more lives than Barbara had ever imagined. She began to receive messages from women in other countries, sharing how her work had inspired them to leave toxic situations, to pursue financial independence, and to stand up for themselves in ways they never thought possible. Meanwhile, Madeline, who had once been a powerful force in Barbara's life, quietly retreated from the public eye. The media had turned on her, exposing the layers of manipulation and deceit she had once hidden behind a mask of charm. Barbara had heard little from her since their last confrontation, and the silence was almost a relief. She knew Madeline's power was fading, her attempts to claw back any influence in the family business blocked, her reputation forever tarnished. For Barbara, it was as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The toxic energy that had once consumed her was now gone. She no longer had to fight to protect herself or her legacy from people who sought to control her. She was free. As the weeks went by, Barbara's charity expanded, reaching more women than she had ever dreamed. Her impact wasn't just in the numbers, it was in the faces of the women who came to her, grateful and empowered. With James by her side, her work had become more than just a mission. It had become a movement. They had built something that would last, something that would continue to change lives long after Barbara was gone. But even with all the success, Barbara knew that the true victory was in the peace she had found. She had built a life that was hers, that was defined by purpose, by strength, and by the women she had helped along the way. And as she stood in the quiet of her new home, watching the sun set on a world that was finally her own, she realized that she had not only reclaimed her life, she had created something that would outlast her. It was a legacy of strength, of resilience, and of the light that always shines through the darkest of times. Barbara sat at the edge of her bed, her fingers tracing the worn edges of an old photograph. It was from years ago, before everything had changed, before the fights, the betrayals, before Elliot's distancing and Madeline's relentless manipulation. The photo was of a time when she had felt secure in the illusion that family, in its traditional sense, could be the source of strength. That illusion had shattered long ago, but now, as she held the picture, it felt like a different life, a life that wasn't hers anymore. The woman in the photo smiled back at her, a younger version, one full of hope and trust. Barbara had been naive then, unable to see the darkness lurking beneath the surface. But she was different now, stronger, wiser, and free. With a deep breath, Barbara set the photograph down. Her gaze turned toward the window. The sun was rising, casting a soft light across the quiet streets below. There was no more need for regret, no more need to look back. The past had shaped her, but it did not define her. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a message from James. "Ready for our next chapter?" Barbara smiled as she read the text. Yes, she was ready. Together they had been building something bigger than just business. It was a future where her legacy would endure and where she could finally enjoy the peace that had eluded her for so long. James had become more than just a business partner. He was a true ally, someone who stood beside her through thick and thin. Together, they had navigated the turbulent waters left behind by Madeline's cruelty and Elliot's betrayal. Now they were working towards something new, a vision for the future that was free from the shadows of the past. With his support, Barbara knew she could tackle anything that came her way. Her phone buzzed again. It was an invitation to speak at a major conference. As the details unfolded on the screen, Barbara couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She had earned this recognition. Her story was no longer one of hardship and loss. It was one of transformation, resilience, and empowerment. For so long, she had been defined by her relationship with Madeline, with Elliot, with the family that tried to manipulate her. Now, Barbara was carving out her own place in the world. She had reclaimed her power and was showing other women how to do the same. And the world was finally starting to see her for who she truly was. Barbara thought of the women who had reached out to her over the past few months, women whose lives had been forever changed by Empower Her. They weren't just looking for advice. They were looking for a model, someone who had survived the storm and come out stronger on the other side. Barbara was that model now. She had the strength to heal, and she had the courage to teach others how to do the same. Her family had been torn apart for years, but now it was healing. James, though not her son by blood, had become the child she never had, someone who respected her not just as a businesswoman, but as a person who had suffered and triumphed. They had forged a bond based on respect, love, and shared values. She no longer felt the emptiness she once did. Her family, once fractured beyond repair, was finally coming together. And then there was Elliot. For so long she had wondered if there would ever be a reconciliation, if the door could ever be reopened. The letter he had sent her still lay in her drawer, a lingering question in the back of her mind. But the more she thought about it, the more Barbara realized that she had already answered it. The answer wasn't in words or apologies. It was in the life she was building now. The life where she called the shots, where she held the power, where she was the one shaping her future. She smiled to herself, knowing that she had taken control of her destiny. No one, not Madeline, not Elliot, not anyone, could take that away from her. Later that week, Barbara stood before a large audience, the bright stage lights shining down on her as she prepared to speak. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The words she had prepared were not just a speech. They were the culmination of everything she had lived through, everything she had fought for. The applause was deafening as she took the microphone. "When my daughter-in-law called me a fat cow," she began, her voice steady, strong. "I didn't fight back with words. I fought back with power." The audience erupted in applause, but Barbara's smile was private. It was the kind of peace she had fought for, the kind of peace she had earned,